Hello and welcome to another episode of The Local Dive. This is your host, Alex Scott, joined by my co-hosts, Dean and Sarah and Ashlyn Portero. How you guys doing?
Hello.
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Good. We are excited to open a can of LaCroix and jump into another episode of the Local Dive podcast. We're going to be talking today in the deep dive about apathy in evangelism and sharing our faith and how we can just grow indifferent to that, sadly, over time. But before we do, we will, as we always do, wade into the shallow end and talk about things that annoy us. What are your pet peeves?
Very positive to start with.
Yeah, we're optimistic to get from the get-go. And honestly, to start, pet peeves, the word just, I don't know, it annoys me. So we're going to go with things that annoy you instead of pet peeves.
Things that annoy. Okay.
Yeah.
Things that annoy us.
Because I'm annoyed by pet peeves.
Nice.
What do we got?
The second the light turns green, if you haven't moved and the person behind you honks.
They're from Miami.
Definitely. But it's like, seriously, like it's really been like,
It's annoying.
it's been a half a second. It really is like that short sometimes. I see it, I'm going.
Right. Oh man, I'm not feeling very annoyed today. So
That's good.
I'm trying. But I'm sure there's a whole list of things.
That's a good posture to have going into the day.
Actually, now I can think of something. I have a pet peeve. Hopefully, neither of my parents are listening to this episode. But they're just the two people that I think of that do it the most. But like, when somebody sends a text and then it's like, if you literally don't answer in like 3 minutes, it's like they like follow up. Like, so my parents, like one of them will text me and say, you know, they'll like ask a question and then like they both call me Ash. And so then they're like, Ash ? And this is like 5 minutes late, like kind of like are you there?
I'm going to start doing that too.
And I literally, we've had this discussion multiple times and they're like, yeah, but we're parents, like we're concerned about you if you don't answer. And I went so far one time as to say, like, if something really was wrong and I was like, you know, lost in the woods somewhere, like dead, like I still wouldn't text you back. Like you wouldn't get a response either way. So you just need to like trust that I'll get back to you. That's my texting pet peeve.
Well, that's a good one. Also, we experience this often, this annoyance. We have our weekly meetings usually at Chick-fil-A, and there's always somebody watching a YouTube video.
Yes.
From
like full volume. Yeah, it's
without
annoying.
any care whatsoever that there's other people in the restaurant and we can hear that one. Oh, I can't handle that one.
Yeah. Since we can't travel, one that came to mind was the person who brings like an entire hot meal from the concourse of the airport onto the plane.
Smell.
And it's like, yeah, because you're either like disgusted by it. It's like, who really buys a tuna salad sandwich in the airport and eats it on a plane where everybody can smell it? Or it makes me mad because like they got, you know, Bobby's Burgers or something, and I'm just mad that they're eating it and I'm not.
Oh, Bobby Flay's burger place.
Yeah,
That's a great spot in an airport.
I think, though, that burgers and fries might be at the top of my list for that. Like, I would almost rather someone bring their, like, Thai curry peanut wrap onto the plane than their Five Guys greasy bag that, like, I have to smell lukewarm, like, 3 rows over. That's just a personal preference, but...
No, that's fair. That's fair.
That's how I feel about that.
Yeah. Any other pet peeves, things that come to mind?
I mean, I probably have 47, and a lot of people could probably name them because tattoos. Sorry.
Oh my gosh.
Back from last week.
We're still there.
Lincoln High School.
Yeah, I can't. I'll have to think. I'm sure, like, as soon as we wrap this up, 4 more will come to me. But
yeah, I had a few, but I didn't take notes, and now I'm drawing a blank. So
we have an important thing to talk about today that we're going to jump into. So
we'll move quickly out of the shallow end and head into our deep dive, where we're going to be talking about, like what I mentioned earlier, apathy and evangelism. This just idea that, you know, we have a tendency sometimes to either forget, to get lazy, to be just less concerned, you know, with sharing our faith with others, with unbelievers. And so I think first, just to kick off the conversation, you know, this is probably, you know, ebbs and flows in people's lives. Hopefully there's seasons where we're active in evangelism, but at times, you know, we don't, you know, maybe we aren't faithful there. What leads to some of this apathy just initially? Like, you know, what causes somebody to go, maybe like they come to faith, they convert, they believe in the gospel, and they're kind of on fire, telling everybody they know, like, they pick up their dry cleaning and they're like, did you know about Jesus? And then over time it wanes. And what leads to just some of that apathy?
I mean, we begin, right, by believing that Christians should share their faith, right? That's like a call in the scriptures to be, vocal about who Jesus is and the gospel story and be willing to tell people about that. So I think that is a non-negotiable, that we're expected and told by God to do this throughout the scriptures. And I think that it sort of transitions into a suggestion more than a command. I've heard like all preachers go, it's not the great suggestion, it's the great commandment. That line that pound the pulpit. There's a lot of truth in that, So I think maybe that begins to happen in our lives, where we maybe think it's for somebody else, or we think it's for the pastor, or we think it's for that really like just Jesus excited person in our church who we think is a little over the top, but we're fine with, as long as it's kind of a bless her heart. That's cool. She does that. Like, great for you, not for me sort of thing. So it's really easy to say, oh, it's about, we don't really believe the gospel, or we don't really believe in hell, or I don't like that conclusion. I think we need to give a little more grace than that. I think people it somehow just becomes not a part of the equation of their Christian life. So we need to talk about that, I think, today too, like unpack that a little bit, like what that looks like and how that happens. That's the first thing that comes to mind as I've been thinking through this, is that just it's not part of their makeup of what it means for them to be a Christian and to follow Jesus. I think that's kind of what happens, because they're discipled without that being part of the context.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I think that just as we go through our lives and, we're people who are still capable of sin, and we're self-absorbed and all of those things. And so I think sometimes you really forget the gospel, your own need for it. And sometimes it can, and I'm not trying to set up a false dichotomy here, but it can, maybe sometimes become more about like my personal growth in Christ, and yet somehow I leave sharing the gospel out of that, right? Like it's, I mean, holiness and evangelism are not at odds with each other. And so I think, but sometimes we can, and it probably depends on the type of person you are too. I mean, I feel like, some people are much more willing to have a conversation about faith, but they may be lacking some of the knowledge, and some of the teaching to really be able to kind of disciple people further into the faith. And so it can kind of be a both and situation, but sharing the good news, like actually sharing the true gospel, I think sometimes we forget that. And so it's kind of a need to rediscover it for yourself all over again. And then that, motivates you, I think, to want to share it, because you realize at the end of the day, like, this was a grace given to you. And so we want to extend that to other people.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that I was thinking about in this too is there is, I mean, sadly, a tendency sometimes, not always, but for people who come to faith, they sort of end up removing themselves from the world. And so they, over time, their church family becomes their close friend group. And, maybe some of their lost friends that they knew before coming to the Lord move away. And so then they're just around less lost people. And so it's not that they don't want to share the gospel, but sometimes they don't have anybody in their circle to share it with. And so, there's people all around us that need to hear the good news, and we're, as we've said, commanded in the scriptures to do that. The Great Commission. But sometimes, like, you have to find people that need to hear it that aren't in your immediate circle. I think that can lead to just like if you're around everybody all the time, you're like, well, they're all my church friends. Like they professingly, believe, they profess to believe the gospel. I don't need to share it with them.
Yeah, and I think you need to pay attention to what's already in front of you. For people in full-time ministry, it really does take extra work and more intentionality, and just kind of paying attention, just to the kind of things in life that bring people around, even your neighborhood, or just people you develop relationships with at a restaurant or wherever it may be. For a lot of other people, I think we who are believers, and hopefully their strongest community is their Christian friends from their church. But we just need to pay more attention to people at work and people in the neighborhood and people that, go to the same park as you, or go run the same route as you that you wave to every day, or those type of things. So I think I agree with you that does happen, no doubt about it. But I think that it doesn't have to happen.
Sure.
And I think that if we just open our eyes more, I don't even think that the non-full-time ministry person has to even be that intentional about finding it. I think they need to be that more intentional about what they're doing about those who already are around them and in their lives. And that's what I would encourage somebody to do. Kind of open your eyes, pay attention, look around.
Yeah, I also think there's like the sort of factor of like, do we see people as made in God's image? Like how much does Imago Dei play into our motivation for evangelism? Because I think that, God has created people in his image, and he gives us himself. And, I think if we have a right understanding of who God is, then, we're not looking at people as, okay, I've got to check off like my good Christian card and say that I evangelized today. Or, you talk about like, we don't want to look at people as projects.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at people apart from God and we say like, they don't have the good news, like, but God wants to give himself to us, to his people. And so we want to take every opportunity to share with every person. So that they have the opportunity to hear the gospel. And so I think that's, so often we're in such a state of, hyper individualism and also just like throughout human history, like we just make life about us. And so, most of the time when I'm looking at a person I don't know, I'm more interested, just in my human nature, in, even if it's not what can this person do for me in like a utility sense, it's like how do we relate? What's our friendship going to be, or what's our connection, or, that kind of stuff, as opposed to, let me take myself out of it and say that this is a person that God loves, that, I want to know God and to have, communion with him, and he gives that to his people. And so the missing link in that is that if you don't know about that, then, that's where I think Christians can step in. And so I just think about myself, and I'm like, there's so many times that, my first view of someone is not the way that, that it should be.
Do you think that, and I'm even thinking about myself, like I sometimes, as you were saying that, Ashley, I don't think about always the eternal reality of those people. And so like when I meet somebody out and about, my first thought, it's usually not even about them. I'm like you said, I'm kind of consumed with myself, but I don't, and not in like a project. And I mean, the person I'm standing in line with at Chick-fil-A, I need to, pull out my 3 Circles booklet and walk them through the gospel. But
Jimmy Scroggins shout out.
Yeah. I don't even, it doesn't even like, sometimes like I'm not even thinking about, is this person, like if what I believe to be true about, heaven and hell, the fact that at some point everyone will sit under judgment for, what they've done, and they'll either be clothed in the righteousness of Christ or they won't, and be judged accordingly, then like that should instantly shift the way that I think about evangelism, the way that my heart and my mind shifts towards these people that I see. And like, if I'm honest, it just usually doesn't, because I'm not thinking about it that way.
Yeah, and I think we've been conditioned by culture in general, and I don't mean like far secular culture, but more kind of like in the middle of like church, and if that's a thing, like in the middle between church and secular. I'm making up things as I go.
Cultural.
In terms of I'm creating categories, kind of cultural Christian sort of. Somebody wrote a book about that. But I've been kind of conditioned. We have that like the idea of like we're so almost afraid to ever be accused of like hellfire and brimstone, that's kind of like the ultimate like no, that I think that just thinking about hell or just even talking about it makes us feel like we're going to be viewed as extreme or weird or or too much, or that like the like Westboro Baptist Church or something, something like in Kansas, something along those lines. And so Jesus, you're talking about seeing somebody and how we think about him. Jesus saw him as what? Sheep without a shepherd, right? So the idea is not just oh my gosh, you're under the judgment of God, but also you're a sheep, you're somebody that is without the Lord, and how that matters. And I think that kind of mindset shift of really seeing people that way, like in need of Jesus, like truly. So those are great factors. There's the image of God component. there's that Ashlyn talked about. There's the need for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
There's the reality of judgment. There's all these things, and I think that we have to figure out how to just make that be a reality in our minds and in our hearts regularly, and in a way that our churches fully embrace that reality without it being this social faux pas or whatever you want to call it kind of thing. Well, it's gonna be, because the gospel's foolishness to those who are perishing, and there's obviously we're not very good at nuance nowadays in our culture. So I'm not saying the person on the side of the road who's screaming at everybody. That's not what I mean,
Right.
But just mindful of those things, of what these people what their condition is and how that really matters. So I think that's just something that has to pivot. I mean, we read the scriptures, Jesus left the 99 to go find the one. The angels rejoice when someone converts. Those are the things that makes heaven excited, so that needs to mean something to us as believers.
Something that I think too, this is just sort of on my mind as we're talking. I feel like in past, I don't know if it's trainings or conferences or just in different settings, you hear sometimes people will say we're more willing to talk about, the latest TV show that we watched that was so great, or, hey, I tried this, I don't know, I'm a girl, I tried this great shampoo, whatever your thing is. I watched this show, I read this book, and we, so, and that kind of calls upon our innate, willingness or whatever that is to response to share something that is great to us that we value. And I definitely agree with that, but I think it is interesting. I'm just sort of trying to flesh this out in my mind as I'm thinking about it. I also think that in the Christian life, I do think that people count the cost. If, I don't think that we can just say, well, you walk right up to your friend and started talking about your TV show. Why didn't you walk up and start talking to him about Jesus? I want to venture to say that most people actually, if you do feel awkward or if you are scared or whatever, I think that my just personal opinion is that probably for a lot of people, that's a sign that you feel the weight of it, that we feel the difference between the good news of the gospel and my favorite chapstick, that I want to recommend
That's
to
well
someone.
said. That's well said.
And so I do think that there is, we have to say, that's part of counting the cost of following Christ. But I think we also have to follow that up with let's just not pit those things against each other and realize that something as fleeting as just a personal preference recommendation has nothing to do with actually, bearing with someone and loving them enough to share the gospel. And so I don't know, that just popped into my mind. I just think but when we count the cost, we also have to have courage, and go back to the fact that, if someone in our life is apart from the Lord, then that should burden us, and we should find, the way to tell them, and maybe there will be awkwardness to get over regardless, but also there's power in the gospel. And I think the Lord, wants to see us faithful in that, but also works through us. Sometimes we just get in our own way.
I think that's really well said. And also I think we need to kind of broaden what we mean by evangelism. Now now sharing the good news, that can't be broad, right? That's a very narrow, that's fixed. Sharing the good news of who Jesus is and what he's come to do for sinners, right? And our need by faith to embrace that truth and repent of our sins. How that is carried out, I think, needs to be broadened. Because I think when people hear evangelism, sometimes they think that means you have to go right up to somebody, who's pumping gas at the Stop and Rob, down the street, and how to
use a not PC term.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that's allowed in 2020.
I think they're convenience stores. This is 2020.
I had a teacher, Mr. Caswell, at Leon High School, who's my American history teacher, and he called them Stop and Robs. That's where I got that from. That's where I first heard it from. Mr. Caswell. He was an interesting guy. So
shout out to the grand old school on the hill.
You better believe it.
Shout out to the local Tallahassee Sing stores. That was where it was
Sing
at
stores,
back in the day.
Greg Tish makes Sing store T-shirts. And I've always thought about getting one.
Fun.
But so I think that's what people think they mean. Is you have to go up to somebody and kind of do the whole have a track or talk to your waitress about Jesus, that you've met for the first time ever, and you first ask her what's her favorite thing on the menu, and then 2 seconds later you're asking her, if she died tomorrow. I don't want to make fun of someone who does that. I mean, James Merritt does that, right? And he if you're listening, don't know, that's my mentor, pastor in Atlanta. I mean, I've seen him do it. Every time he does it, I'm like, oh, and I get a little, uncomfortable. But at the same time,
And then he's posting pictures on Twitter of, hey, this is so-and-so who just accepted Christ.
He's
Me, your
led
brother,
more people to
sister in the
Jesus
Lord.
than anybody in the world, right?
Yeah.
So that says something about me that I get awkward with it, but at the same time, like I call him Doc, his way of doing evangelism, that is not the only way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. God uses it. I every now and then, will do something like that in my own kind of personal conversations. What I mean by broadening it is it's okay if you are talking about your favorite chapstick for an hour and don't get to anything that day. Because a lot of times, especially in our current context, like it takes building a relationship. And people are going to turn you off if they know that like every time Alex comes over, every time Ashlyn comes over, they're going to talk to me about Jesus. They're going to talk to me about church. They're going to, because they see it as they're preaching to me.
Mm-hmm.
You're preaching to me.
And we live in we're steeped in consumer culture in ways that we don't know, but we also are aware that everyone is pandering to us all day long.
Yep.
And so it's difficult as a Christian to have to separate, sharing the gospel is not selling something. Especially in an age where people, we're questioning, we're asking, what is truth? I mean, all of these things swirling together makes it, you have to really, like the power of God just has to come through, and God is sovereign and he's going to do that. So we can trust in that. But yeah, it makes it complicated.
Yeah. But so I think that like James' Merritt approach, I think is wonderful. At the same time, what people don't know about him is he also has these long relationships outside of his like kind of walk up to somebody on the spot. He does that, but he's also investing in people that maybe they're just talking about Georgia football. He loves the Georgia Bulldogs, and it'll get to that point. Because what's going to happen is, and this happens to all of us, is all of us on this podcast, is that we might not have shared the gospel in that moment with a friend that we've been investing in. You've been over at their house and you're watching Netflix together, having a drink, or meeting for dessert, whatever it might be. But they know you're a Christian, okay? And when anything hits the fan or anything rough happens in their life, guess who they are calling? Guess who they're texting? Automatically. And a lot of times that gives us the opportunity to share our faith. So someone might hear this and go, but what? You don't know if they die tomorrow? And okay, I'm all for that. And I believe that there's an urgency. But I think building a relationship in order to point someone to Christ eventually is not apathy.
Yeah,
I think it's just having time, just you knowing that person and you having a relationship and you having the instinct with somebody that right this second isn't the right time, or maybe that, man, we started kind of getting into some deep conversations last time we were together. The next time we get together, I have a chance to go, hey, I really enjoyed our lunch last week. And I just kind of wanted to follow up on that. Or it might not be the right time. And the next time you just need to go to lunch again and just have fun, So what I mean by that is let's trust God's sovereignty. And that's not in odds with also believing in the urgency of evangelism, right? Like we're going to believe that God is working and that he's the one that's going to save. And at the same time, we believe that people can't know unless they're told, Romans 10. And we're going to live. It's not a tension. It's a double, approach to how we view the Christian life. So I just want to help people just kind of broaden how evangelism happens, and how evangelism is done can't be defined by like a Southern revival rule of how evangelism has to be. Telling you the good news, that's what evangelism is, but how that's carried out, I just think there's lots of ways. And I think sometimes we need to realize that we need to trust our instincts with people on when's the best time to have a conversation, ask a question, point them to Christ, those type of things.
Yeah, so like I think clearly what we're saying is like there's no formula for sharing the gospel. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Like there's no, there's helpful resources, there's helpful times, there's times where you're going to go in and, that may be one of the first things you say to the person, and it may be that over time it develops. For the person who, Ashlyn, you mentioned like they're maybe afraid or hesitant maybe to jump in to share their faith because of feeling the weight of it, that idea that, this person is sitting under the judgment of their sin, or they just, it's not the right time. They're developing this relationship. What maybe tips or pointers or just encouragement would you give to those people who are they're hesitant to move it to that point for whatever reason? Like they've been developing their relationship. Maybe even they've kind of seen glimpses of like, to your point, Dean, of, hey, we had this conversation last time that I really could go there. I think I have an open door, but they're just hesitant. What would you say to that person?
I think prayer is a good place to start. Just like asking the Lord to open doors. I mean, that I've seen that a lot in my life of just, when you're at a place where you don't know like when that next opportunity is going to come, or just noticing, like, I think also just being aware of our own like shortcomings and just kind of saying like, Lord, I'm not great at this all the time. Like, I don't have this figured out in every situation. And I'm, I don't have the right words to say always. And so, and at least for me, I have seen like when I do ask the Lord in prayer to guide me in that, he's very faithful to do that, because that's something that I think is in accordance with God's will, is sharing the gospel. He's given that to us to share with the world. And it always comes in like the least or the most unexpected ways, And so I think that's when you have to, I actually think somebody's hesitancy could help them in the sense that if you are open to the way that the Lord is going to orchestrate something, then you kind of just have to sit back and get out of the way. And sometimes that's as simple as like, just have a conversation with somebody, and you don't have to have, sorry, that was my phone. You don't have to have, I think sometimes we overthink things, we build it up in our heads. And so I would actually say if you are hesitant, take advantage of having some patience and try to be watchful for opportunities the Lord gives you. And then step into it and don't be afraid to just ask. I think questions are great too. Like sometimes I think we feel like we have to, step up into our pulpit and launch in, or whatever. But I mean, just asking a question is so great, because then you're getting to know someone and you're opening it up for conversation. And usually I have found that, because I can be like, if I'm like, in the moment, like I really care about this person, like knowing the Lord or knowing, the truth, or I want to really speak to this, like I almost like work myself up and I want to like, get onto my soapbox and just go. And the more that I hold back, it's like the Lord always works through, it's like I have to get out of my own way. And so I don't mean like hold back to the point of like you just sit there silently praying that the person will somehow like in their head. No, like we have to share, how else will people hear? But yeah, I would just say to go to the Lord in prayer and ask for confidence. If you are asking God to help you tell people about him, that is in accordance with his will. So I think that prayer is going to get answered in the right time.
Sure. And that's totally true. And when it comes to apathy and evangelism, I think one of the reasons too is just that it's hard. And it's easier when it's hard to remove ourselves rather than engage, right? Kind of a natural human instinct is I don't want to take the hard road. I want to avoid awkwardness. Awkward is like almost like the cardinal sin in our culture today. Yeah. Like we avoid awkwardness at all costs. So I think that's a lot of it. I don't think it's as much that people don't care or that they. I think that we just remove a lot of times anything that's hard. I mean, it's hard to talk to somebody about Jesus. That's extremely awkward, right? Yeah. I mean, it's much easier to talk. Why do we talk about football and our favorite chapstick and where we're going on vacation? That's a fun, easy conversation, right?
And I think it comes out of people actually, they care about the relationship. Yeah. And so they're hesitant to, which we have to get over fear of man in these conversations, but they're hesitant.
That's a big part.
They're hesitant to insert controversial things. Obviously sharing, your faith is controversial, or it can be. But even other things. I think just in general, like we have a tendency not to go very deep in conversation because we're hesitant to ruin relationship, rightfully so. But there's a desire for care that goes into that.
Yeah. So what's the old? You can almost ask any non-believing person; they'll even know the right answer to the old question of what are the two things you shouldn't talk about at Thanksgiving? What are they?
Religion and
politics. Right, religion and politics, right? Everybody knows that. Why is that? Because those are probably because the politics side is just heated, right? It's just so emotional, and the people just vent and rant, and they don't want to hear it anymore. And the religion side is just awkward, and it comes across people as you're being judgmental, especially if you live in a major secular context of a city. And by that I mean like not Seattle, not San Francisco. You're going to have people who already think they're Christians. So an evangelism conversation with somebody who thinks they're already a Christian and they're not is extremely offensive, because they just see it straight up as you are judging me and you think you're perfect and the best Christian in the world. And that's just really offensive to them. So that's a whole nother layer of evangelism, is evangelizing in context where people are already view themselves as religious people because they're not atheists or because they've been to church before. So again, there's just timing. Those things just matter. Because I don't want to do more damage. At the same time, I do believe their soul is eternally damaged if they don't know Jesus. I believe that with all my heart. I believe that hell is a real place where real people go. And I also believe that I know how a conversation's going, and I have enough feel to know if I need to take it to this next level or to wait or to not, those type of things. Like, and then I do have human, I guess, fleshly things. Like I care a lot about what people think about me. I don't want people to not like me. I don't want to make somebody mad. I don't want to have someone be disappointed in me.
Mm-hmm.
All those type of things are hard for me. So those are always growth areas for me, is not making somebody upset, how that can be such a driving force for me. So that can creep in, just that fleshly side. So there's the good side, I'm trying to have some feel here and know if I should push or not, or this is the perfect time, let's go. Or am I just being in the moment, not wanting to make somebody upset with me? And I need to be able to, kind of be able to distinguish between the two. And that's just a growth area.
Alex, I think something that you said earlier about, that people do care about relationships, and they do care about how they navigate through evangelism conversations in terms of what it does to the person that you're with. I think that's an important distinction to make, that when we're talking about different reasons for not doing evangelism, it's sort of all of these different reasons: awkwardness, fear, lack of confidence in your own speech or whatever it is. These are all these are all aspects of or reasons why we don't evangelize. But I think true apathy, legitimately just not being interested in sharing the gospel, I think that's when we do have to talk about that is disobedience. And it's, I think, a sign that, again, we have forgotten the gospel, that if it's not good news to us, it's not going to be good news to somebody else, I mean, because you could just as easily share the gospel and say, but I don't believe any of that. That's not good news to me, and that would be, awful. It'd be, straight up rejecting Christ. But so I do think that, not to be so direct there, but that is something that I think we have to think about and check in our lives is, okay, are there barriers to me sharing evangelism, whether it's, outside of myself or inside myself, or am I just not interested in sharing it with this person? And if that's the case, it probably, I don't know, somebody could argue me on this. I would say in that moment, it probably is best that I don't, because I need to probably go back and, repent and get my own heart right. As opposed to, the Lord can work through whatever. So I'm not saying that if you just force yourself to go out and tell 10 people today about Jesus, that God's not going to work through that. It might not be quite as effective, and that would just also be a weird thing to do. I think if you were I really don't want to share the gospel, I'm going to go share it with 10 people. But I don't know. Sometimes we need to just force ourselves into obedience. Maybe just get it over with. That's not it's not commentary on legalism. You guys know what I mean. Everybody, please filter these things. It's 2020.
We've got enough problems.
Right. Don't email me about anything I just said. I won't respond to you.
I'm concerned about Ashlyn Portero's approach to.
Yeah. Don't at me, whatever the audio version of that is.
So Jesus said, follow me, his first calling, to people, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. That line, to me, should set the stage for the Christian life. He didn't say, follow me and I'll make you Bible scholars. Now, should we attempt to be serious students of the Bible? Of course we should. But he said, follow me. He didn't say, follow me and I'll make you somebody who always makes the right decisions, or follow me and I'll make you solve all the world's problems of justice. All those things are part of the Christian story and responsibility. He said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. This is what we're about to do. So do y'all think that it's a missing part of discipleship in a lot of churches, that people have been discipled, and we've really been intentional about trying to make this a central part of our discipleship? But do you think there's a lot of discipleship happening that is not preparing people to be fishers of men, but instead is just trying to make them, smarter, better, more informed, more plugged in Christians? Do you think that's part of the problem?
I wouldn't say intentionally so, but I think it's oftentimes an unintentional side effect, maybe of some, modern discipleship. I think, one of the things that, and as you were talking about that, Dean, that I was thinking about was oftentimes discipleship comes often is synonymous with like learning doctrine or, understanding theology and like the study of the scriptures, which we absolutely need, right? Like we need to know and see the heart of God as it's revealed through the scriptures and study those things deeply. Where I think maybe modern day discipleship can miss the mark is that there's not a tie between doctrine and a growing love for how we view the Lord, and then subsequently what that means about how we view others who don't yet know him. And so there's a disconnect between like where we see, we as like the maybe Christians in America at large see discipleship and evangelism as two separate things, when I would say any healthy discipleship ministry or philosophy should include evangelism, because to your point, Jesus says, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And if sanctification is to look more like Jesus, it would be to disciple, or to, in a discipleship sense, it would be to evangelize. So I think we miss the mark sometimes, and we have a tendency to want to grow in like love and knowledge of the Lord, but not apply that in this area of our lives.
I think that's good. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I liked what you said, Alex, about that it probably isn't intentional in most places, but that there is a sort of natural separation. And I don't know if some of that flows from like we just look at everything in terms of like a program or like an initiative, or we need categories to be able to define things, because when we see Jesus making the disciples fishers of men, he's doing that through communal life together, and it's not like, come join my like cohort, it's just like, come follow me, and so I think that, I mean, it's interesting to think about, Jesus inviting the disciples to come and follow him, and sort of giving them a glimpse of that, and then his, leaving them with the Great Commission and kind of saying, okay, like this is now culminating in like the call on your life. And so I think we can just look at that and try to model that in our lives. And I don't think that we have to put, growth and knowledge at odds with evangelism. Dean, I know that's not what you were saying, but I don't think it has to be. But we do have to be careful that we don't, love head knowledge more than we love the Lord. And sometimes that can get confusing, to us or something if pride comes in there, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think like right doctrine and growing in that should hopefully lead to right living. And so I don't think you can ever, and again, I think it's unintentional, but I think there is a tendency to divorce mission from discipleship.
Yes.
Like they are two separate programs. Like I go to this Bible study, or I go to this, class, or I go to this thing, or I watch this seminar so that I can learn about God. And then over here, I do discipleship, or I do evangelism, however that looks. And one should fuel the other. It's sort of a circle. Like we should have a love for people that wants that causes us to share our faith. And as we share our faith, we should be kind of regularly going back to the source of what, Ashlyn, you talked about. Like you can share the gospel without believing it. And so it should be good news to us. And so we need to continually remind ourselves that we were lost, and that by the Lord's goodness, we have been found, and that we are now called to go help others hear and find that truth.
I think y'all are spot on. And this is such an important conversation that I hope is helpful for people. What do you guys, I just had things, I'm not trying to be the host, but I have things above my head as we're talking here. What do you guys, I'm totally on the spot here, but that's kind of how we flow, and it works best for us usually. Yeah. So what do you guys think needs to be in a gospel presentation? Like if you're sharing your faith with somebody, so the person on here, it's like, okay, I agree with all this, but like I don't really know what to say, what to do. Like what do you all think is important in sharing your faith with somebody? And I don't mean the person at the gas station that you walk up to. I mean, like, let's say that you are sitting at your house with a good friend who you know is not a believer. They might think they are, might not, but they don't know the Lord. No fruit in their life, just no real belief in Christ. And y'all are just sitting there watching a show or hanging out, having a drink, whatever. Might be just hanging out together. And like the door opens like for a conversation, and they're like seem ready to hear it. Because it's time, and they know it's time. They want to know what do you have that I don't, or what's going on in my life? Why am I so this? What's kind of a go-to for what would you? What I asked two questions there. What would you kind of say, and what would you how would you approach, and also what would you include?
So I'll jump in, and then Ashlyn, you can fill in where maybe you see things differently or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think so. Some of that I think is situational, right? So oftentimes in opportunities that I've had, it's based around the way that either I see an issue, whether that's something happening in culture or just kind of a biblical worldview issue, or it's around hurt and pain. And suffering. And so which, Jimmy Scroggins in the Three Circles calls brokenness. And, and so the brokenness is all around. And to me, that's one of the easiest entry points into gospel conversations, is to say, hey, what you're dealing with right now, this isn't the way the world was meant to be. I mean, we talked a couple episodes about alcohol and all of the that results from the abuse of alcohol, which is a result of our sin, which goes against God's design for that. And so I think that oftentimes can be an entry point. And so maybe that would be a tip or a suggestion, is look for areas where there is brokenness that goes against God's design, and say, hey, you mentioned this. This is something that here's how the way that I view the world through the scriptures, how God designed your family, your marriage, your work, your worth, your image to be. Sin has caused us to see that in a distorted way, and here's the hope that we have in Christ, and that hopefully, really, I mean, the Three Circles, whether or not you draw it on a cocktail napkin, is a really helpful framework for thinking through just kind of the gospel story, and so I think that's kind of, without specific examples of this, is the thing that somebody's going through, is kind of how I think through those, and how I've had opportunities to talk about. Other times, I've just straight up, I've had people ask me, and so that's I was well, you asked the hope I have for the Lord, here you go, here's my testimony. So I don't know, those are the easiest conversations to have. But
Yeah, no, I definitely agree and echo all of that. How I would respond in the moment would depend on the conversation, but something that becomes more and more just compelling to me, and just for helping people to really grasp the weight of the gospel, is, just that you are dead in your trespasses, but you can be made alive together with Christ. And I mean, that's my story. That's all of our stories. And I think that is, especially in, in our Western and in our American culture, and, fair, middle upper class, that tends to be the sort of sphere that we find ourselves in for the most part. I just don't think that people actually believe that they're dead. I think most people want to feel good. And so it's not, and if you think about in conversations I've had before, it's not that your life is just off right now, or you're just in a funk, or the planets aren't aligned, even though all those things may be true. I don't know anything about planets, but maybe they are or are not aligned. I don't know.
Keep Pluto as a planet. That's all I know.
There you go.
There's 8 or
Pluto.
9.
Pluto is where all of this started. Let's be real. They took Pluto away, and here we are in 2020.
Fair.
It has not worked out for
Fair
us.
assessment.
Is that your COVID conspiracy theory?
It might be.
Pluto
Yeah. Again, don't email me about any of this. But it's not, it's not just any of those things. It's that you are dead in your sins, and the only hope that you have is Jesus Christ, is to come to the Lord. And the wonderful thing is that the gospel is good news to us that tells us that, that we can't justify our sins on our own, that Jesus Christ took them upon himself, and through faith by grace we're saved, and so that can be the way that we sort of apply that to a person is different for every person. You might need to have a conversation about, this is who you were made for and who you were designed to be. Sometimes that speaks to people, or, Alex, you mentioned that there's brokenness and the world is not as it should be, or there's deep pain and hurt, whatever I think the way that we apply that to somebody, that's where I think we can, maybe almost in a Paul sense, all things to all people, I can speak the language that's going to help, this person connect some things to their lives practically. But at the end of the day, there's a deep chasm, between us and God that's only filled by Christ. And so I just think in some ways, and gosh, it's there's so many times I don't like being direct, because it's That's scary. But I do wonder if in in a sort of a growing, I mean, we're definitely in a secular culture, but as that grows, just being able to be straight up about it, and just say, look, that's what I believe, that's what it is. It's not just that you're having a bad season. It's that, you need to be reconciled to God. And one thing I do want to just add to that too, is that now, not that we ever could before, but especially in, sort of we've talked before about this, Christian or cultural Christianity that, in Tallahassee, where we are, and where many people find themselves. I do think that you have to talk more about God now, kind of almost making the case for I don't just believe in a vague spiritual being. I believe that there's one true God. And so I do think you have to kind of set that, and almost go into a, from the beginning, here's, and we have to have a good understanding of, who the triune God is. And so, not that you have to give somebody a theology lesson right then and there, although you might want to, but I do think that's important, because sometimes when we start with, you're a sinner and you need Jesus Christ, and you're separated from God. Well, does that person actually, know that or sense that? Who is God? What do they think about God? Because that may not matter to them. So, it's different depending on the person, but those are all things that would be in my mind.
And I think too, oftentimes we make a bigger deal out of it than maybe our lost friends, because if we've built that relationship, this isn't the person at the gas station, they probably know you're a Christian. And so, and if they're a cultural Christian, this might be a little bit different. There might be, you might need some more nuance, but if they don't profess to be a Christian, they expect your view on things to be different. And so sometimes we think we're being really crazy, and we're oh no, what are they going to think? And in in their mind, they're oh no, I wanted to hear that because I don't see it that way, And so it can help take the pressure off in some regard, because they know they don't see the world through the same lens that we do. And so you actually have some freedom in there to go, this is what I believe. You may not believe it, you may disagree with it, but here's how, based on what we see to be true in the scriptures, how I view this topic, and here's the hope that I have in Christ. And they may not come to know the Lord, but they don't think you see it the same way.
Yeah, I think Ashlyn's comment about a kind of understanding that there is a God, there's one true God, as opposed to vague spiritual, big man upstairs, vague God, is really important, because the whole I'm a sinner and I'm separated from God isn't going to mean very much
if you don't
unless we realize there is a God and here's what he said and here's who he is. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. What role does community, to use a 2016 buzzword, play in in evangelism? And I think church community, how can brothers and sisters come alongside one another to help fight apathy in evangelism?
Well, I would hope that people are sharing with their community, Christian community, about who's in their life, who's on their heart, who they're spending time with, who they're burdened for. And those people are praying first and foremost. These people are praying for your coworker, your sister, your friend, your husband, your wife. All the above. So I think that's crucial, man. Just to know that I have these 10 people in my life, and they are praying every day for my sister, for my boss, for my son, my daughter. I think that's the biggest one. And then from there, I think that it's really helpful. And I've seen this happen actually a lot of times in the history of our church, that community wants to get to know your friend, get to know your sister, get to know that person, and that person starts hanging out more with the whole group. And they've never been unconditionally loved like this before. They don't feel like they're on trial every 10 seconds for how they look, for what they say. There's just people that are genuinely care about them. And to me, that's we've seen people come to know the Lord here who were immersed into one of their Christian friends' Christian community. And I think that can be a really cool thing as well. That's just what first comes to mind.
Yeah, I would agree. I think community just is a great way for us to encourage one another on, and hold one another accountable, and ask questions. Hey, how's that person doing? Have you had an opportunity to talk to them lately? And just kind of helping keep it at the forefront, and also encouraging us when you feel if you as an individual feel man, I'm just not getting through to this person, or I'm waiting on the Lord to open their eyes, to get to hear other people who, get to share good stories of, I had this great conversation with someone, or I got to share Christ. That's just a good reminder, that, okay, maybe God's, God, I know that God's at work. Maybe right now he's, it's not time for this person to understand yet, or, it's just the Lord is sovereign, and I get to also, because if we are the church, we get to celebrate with one another in that. So
yeah, I know too. Like I feel pressure when other people know, in a good way. Like I can't quite be so apathetic. If I'm like, hey, will you pray for this person in my life? Like I know you're gonna ask me, hey, how's your friend? How's your family member? Have you had any conversations lately? And so there's just like a good pressure that comes from, but it not in a way of like, a legalism standpoint, or I don't remember what you said about that earlier, but like, kind of forcing yourself into obedience, but it's just a good, like, oh, there are other people invested in the life of this person that are praying, that care, that want to see them come to know the Lord. And like, as the person who's most directly connected to them, I'm kind of carrying that torch. I mean, obviously it's the Lord doing the work, but just that provides a good, healthy pressure as we try to live out what it means to be Christians and to share the good news and to take it to a lost world. So good conversation today. Thank you guys for that.
Onward, everybody. Who's your one, right? I love that campaign. Think of somebody in your life, that just one person.
Yep.
Pray for that person, invest in that person, look for opportunities to share the gospel, lock in.
Yep.
Imagine if every Christian had one person.
Change the world. Change the world. As we record this, it is Ashlyn Portero's birthday today. I'd sing, but nobody would want that. So that's my gift to you, not singing.
Thank you.
But happy birthday. As we transition into the Local on Tap segment, we are going to spend a few minutes talking about birthdays. And we want to roll back the clock and imagine that we are all children in Tallahassee and we have a birthday to celebrate. Where are you going as a child to celebrate your birthday?
I have no shame love for Chuck E. Cheese, but that's not going to be my choice. A picnic with Chuck E. Cheese pizza on the 50-yard line at Leon High School football field? No, I'm just kidding.
God.
I'm kidding. Sort of.
No, you're not.
I would want to have a wiffle ball game with cake afterwards and all that kind of stuff at Winthrop Park.
That's a good.
That'd be my kid.
It's like a good classic child birthday.
Yeah, that'd be my
party.
kid birthday party in Tallahassee.
So I'm thinking about this from the perspective that I am a child, like, because not, as an adult looking back, I'm going to go Fun Station because there's just something about go-karts as a 10-year-old. Nothing's better.
And the bumper boats. Yes. I'll walk around like wet and smelly and play my arcade games.
Laser tag, get 600 tickets to get like a pen, out of the reward station, and a piece of Laffy Taffy or something.
That's a really good one. I mean, like something like that would definitely had birthdays like that. I'm also just gonna go classic and just say pool party. I loved it as a child of the summer. I loved a good pool party. You just pizza and eat a bunch of crap food and. True story, I think it was my 3rd or 4th grade birthday party, we had a pool and so I had a pool party and we swam and then we did, I think, like cake and food and stuff like that. And then we all watched Spice World. And
I don't even know what that is.
It's the Spice Girls movie.
Oh, nice.
So if you are listening to that and that's a blast from the past for you, you're welcome. And there was a girl at my birthday party who lived a super sheltered life and she had never watched it. And as soon as it was over, she asked my mom if we could rewind it and start it again. And my parents were like, oh no, we've corrupted this poor girl.
Life changing.
Yeah.
They got a phone call after your birthday.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, happy birthday, Ashlyn. We are grateful for your life.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of The Local Dive. We'll see you here next week. Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Local Dive, a podcast diving into deep and shallow musings about Christ, the church, and culture. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow The Local Dive on social media and continue the conversation with us on Instagram and Twitter at The Local Dive Pod.